Welcome back to another episode of the Rooted and Rested podcast. I'm Natanya, and today I am very excited to be introducing a very good friend of mine, Nicole, to you as we talk about some super interesting things. Nicole is a journalist and she has been reporting the news in the Middle East for 20 years and has some incredible insights and stories and perspectives on both self and how she relates to her job and the things that she's surrounded by, the events that she's responding to. And I wanted to take a bit of time to really quiz her on how she carries all of that and how she has developed coping mechanisms, or if she's developed coping mechanisms over the years to help her deal with the incredibly heavy, at times, stories that she's had to carry and report on and really get inside of as she reports the events of the Middle East. Now, we know the Middle East is very volatile. I have a very deep connection to the region. I've lived there for a long time, and I'm about to move back. So I am touching base with people over there as well as in the UK. And I think one of the things that fascinates me is how people have learned to cope. There are so many crazy things going on in the world around us, and whether it is coping with running a massive corporate company, or whether it is coping with the events that are happening in your home, whether it is parenting, whether it is running a business, whether it's leading something, huge and massive, it doesn't matter. Our bodies respond to stress. It doesn't matter what that stress originates from. Our bodies respond, and our person responds to those things. And I think one of the things I've really come to appreciate and love through working with people, through coaching people, through learning more, learning about somatics, learning about trauma, is that resilience is the most incredible thing that I see in humanity. It is just the most valuable and precious thing. But I think the thing that I have also come to understand is that resilience does not necessarily mean health. We have to cope at times, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we are healthy in how we cope. And I'm on a little bit of a quest across this podcast and across some of the guests I invite, to try and figure this out. How can we be resilient and healthy? How can we expand our capacity without it being, the end of us or break us in some way? I see this so often with particularly women that I deal with in my work, of people that have developed such a level of resilience that they're actually crumbling underneath it, and they have developed such a coping strategy or a mechanism that actually is leaving them completely broken underneath. And my quest is about thriving, and thriving means that you're healthy, that you grow, that you can expand, that you can take more capacity or not. It's not all about capacity. It's about personhood growth, and growth is positive. Growth is healthy. So some of my questions to Nicole were really in pursuit of that. How can she walk through some of the things that she's walked through, some of the things that she's seen, and maintain that healthy interaction with her job, with events, with herself, with her home, her family? So I do hope that you really find this an interesting interview. I personally loved it, and I think we're going to try and do a part two at some point, but I do hope that you hear some cool, interesting things in this conversation. So enjoy. Hi, Nicole. Thank you
Hey,
so much.
Natanya.
Thank you so much for
Hey,
joining me.
thank you. It's good to be here. Good to see you.
I am looking forward to hearing what you have to say about our juicy questions. Why don't you just give a little introduction about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, my name is Nicole Jansezian. I am originally from New York, but I moved to Jerusalem over 20 years ago. I wanted to be a reporter in a place where there would always be something exciting to cover, and I determined that this would be the place. So, anyway, I've lived here for over 20 years. I'm an independent journalist, and now, I have a family here and everything, so it's been interesting getting immersed in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely chose a spot with some drama. Um, so one of the questions that I have always, I still, even knowing you more, have wondered is how does a typical day work for you? Is there even such a thing?
That is actually the problem. I feel like there is never such a thing. Even, you will hear lately, you'll even hear in my reporting that because now it's not just like, let's say I'm writing an article. I would never write this in an article I was writing for a newspaper, but if I'm doing like a live broadcast, I love to point out the fact that when my kids actually have school 5 days a week, it's a miracle. It's like the exception rather than the rule. So, yeah, so there is no typical day for me because there's no typical day for almost anybody here.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, you could say certain things happen every day, even
Mm.
though nothing's typical. Like you will check the news, you will see what's happening to varying degrees of interest, whether it's like, anything from elections or new alliances and coalitions for the elections or World War III. But in general, you will check the news, you will see what's relevant for your audience, what you think is the most important thing, and that you need to do a deep dive on. Then, of course, sometimes there's like this impromptu press conference, and you'll like upend your entire day. And if you had even thought of a schedule, well, it's out the window, and you're sitting in traffic to get to a place. And so yeah, I I feel like my days and my life is everything is now more reactive to events that are happening as opposed to I've carefully planned this and I'm sticking to it, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean
Um,
it reactive is the right word. I mean you're
mhm.
or responsive because you're constantly just jumping onto whatever it is that's going on around you. But how do you at the end of the day, how do you feel like that must be so like unsettling and exhausting to just constantly be pulled in a million directions.
Yeah, I think it just depends on the severity of the situation. Sometimes it's actually energizing. I mean, I do have to say, like, it could be a really boring news day, and suddenly for instance, the Latin patriarch, who is actually a cardinal, which is like, one of the top positions in the Catholic Church. And he's here in Jerusalem and he just like calls a press conference and it's like, oh, there's excitement right there, and so you go to that. Or sadly, if it's another event, there is some sort of adrenaline that is associated, a crime, a terror attack, and you have to drop everything and then go cover that. So in some ways it does give you that adrenaline rush, and I'm sure you would have a lot to say about what happens when the adrenaline leaves and you crash. But it does kind of get you through the day. It also helps you with the writing process because
Mm.
once you've covered this event, you really need that energy to get out a very quick article if that's what you're working on. So I try to use it to my advantage when I can. I've basically, let's put it this way, having been a journalist for 30 years now, I guess. It's something that I have learned to navigate physiologically as well as
Yeah.
physically and actually and with the family, that on slow news days, how you can manage the slower pace. But being that I live here, it's more often than not a fast pace.
Yeah.
And and I do find a way to kind of to use that to my advantage. And also, if I know that something's going to happen later, or to not be troubled by, oh, I don't feel productive because it's a slow news day, because I know I'll make up for it sometimes possibly that same day. So it is okay to like take a little break, maybe let's say in the morning when there's nothing going on, because you know that later on things could gear up or later in the week or something like that. So I don't know. I've learned I kind of have managed that for so long now that it's part of my life. And it's a great question because I never really reflected on it before.
Yeah, I mean, I listen to you and I see you and I follow you, and I sometimes find myself thinking how, I mean, you've just talked about you've learned to harness this into being
Hmm.
like a productive thing and a helpful thing. But when you're having to respond to things that are completely outside of your control all the time as your job, like, do you find yourself reacting in certain ways, like mentally, physically, emotionally, that you've kind of thought through, or do you find that it's kind of like it's like a learned response, or do you feel like sometimes it just catches you completely unaware and you just roll with it?
That's a great question. And I actually have an example for you from recent history because I would say that most of my career and most of what I talked about, those are the one-offs. Like, for instance, there are weeks. And pre-COVID, it was more so that the weeks were mostly predictable. Yeah, there's
Mm.
always a crime, a terror attack, some like maybe a hastily called press conference or something like that. But those were actually the exceptions. And so you could kind of predict your week. But so when you're only reacting to a one-off, like when I was a beat reporter, like in a location in small town New Hampshire, there was a car accident. And so, okay, you go and you deal with it. You cover it, you write about it, and then okay, you breathe and you move on. Now, interestingly enough, like so you learn how to manage that and
Yeah.
you can get through the one or the two. And uh but so recently we just went through a war in which the country that I was in was under attack along with others, but as I was not just covering the war, I was living the war, and it was for 40 days
Yeah.
straight. So that then I didn't have language for, and I didn't have coping mechanisms for, because you can cope with the one off, even if it's traumatic. Like I've had to cover terror attacks, bus bombings, things like that.
Yeah.
And that is it's an isolated trauma, and you can deal with it, whether it's the time, like all the factors involved from shock and interruption to like the things you saw, etc. But when you have a sustained thing that for 40 days you're living like in escalated tensions, not just as a country, but as not, also as a reporter, also as a person, also as a mom and a wife, and just learning how to function. I had never done that before, and so
Mm.
that was extremely different how it even hit me physically.
Yeah.
And I've actually coined a phrase now called war lag. Like, you have jet lag, like you
Yeah.
travel from a time zone and you've got like they say that for each hour of a time difference, it will take you one day
Yeah.
to recover. So if it's 7 hour difference, 7 days. So we had 40 days. And let me tell you something. I think it's going to take the full 40 days to, like a full 40 days after, since the war, to actually recover, to pick up all the pieces of who you were and really calm yourself yet again, to recover from this one.
Yeah. Oh, I can well believe it. I mean, my husband, you know this, my husband and daughter flew in the night before that war broke out, and they texted me from the plane to let me know that the only people on the flight were correspondents, were news correspondents.
Oh my goodness.
And that was what made them go, maybe the government guidelines for travel to this country haven't been updated in time. But I saw that in them when they came back, um, that it took quite a few days for them to
Hmm.
to stop. jumping and being shocked and like going into like mode, like, do I need to run?
Yep.
Just from like, and we've actually all talked about this. I haven't been there in this season of war, but we have had skirmishes over the years when we were there. And there is a certain tone that seems to come out most in motorbikes and vacuum cleaners that is
Hmm.
exactly like the siren. And
Yes.
your body reacts immediately. Before your brain has thought about it, you're already in like mode.
Yep.
So I can imagine it will take, but I'm sure it will take far longer than 40 days to recover from 40 days of ongoing
Yeah.
night and day. Yeah, I think one of my questions was actually how do you switch off at the end of your day? And I think
Hmm.
switching off is actually a skill that we think we can do it by putting the TV on or reading a book or, going and having a spa day or whatever it is that we do.
Right.
Go for a run, putting your music on, whatever. There are all kinds of things that we think is us switching off, but you're not going to be able to switch off if your system isn't ready to switch, doesn't feel it can switch off. If it's stuck in this heightened alert place, where you are all going to be to one degree or another.
Right.
How do you do that? How do you switch off when your body doesn't know it can, or you have to get up and do this all again tomorrow? Or like, what's your strategy for that?
Wow. Strategy might be overselling the concept, but I don't know. I mean, I would have to, let's put it this way, this little reprieve that we've had from one war to probably the next has given me an opportunity to reflect in many ways on it. Now, I would say I'm just the kind of person that has a hard time switching off no matter what, despite whether it's the job or maybe I'm attracted to the job because, this type of career, I like the fast pace, I like that, the adrenaline and the rush and the breaking news. It's fun for me. I do like it. But now the problem with news, though, and I don't know if other people in other careers have this challenge, but the news never shuts off. So how do you
Yeah,
switch it off? Like and especially I'll tell you what, these things that we have in our hands, these phones are a big problem because you are bombarded with information. And I'm not going to say news because there's a difference between information and news. And that's actually the job of a reporter is to find out which information is newsworthy and process it for you and present it to you as news. But we're bombarded with information and if you are sitting with your phone, you are not switching off. Like, even if you're playing a mindless game on your phone as a way to switch off or reset, you're
yeah,
still getting alerts because you're holding the thing in your hand. So I will tell you that after like a couple days after the war, we were all so high, and then suddenly this thing was just taken from us. It's just gone. There's a ceasefire. Deal with it, and it sounds like, oh, great, but your body cannot just make that switch. Your
yeah,
mind cannot just make that switch. So it was so many people said I kind of like, I kind of wish the war would go back, like come back. Like like normalized that
mm,
and then missed it because it was like when I say it was just ripped from us, I mean, of course, war should stop. Nobody should want war. But when you get used to a way of responding and living,
yeah,
and then suddenly that's taken from you, you have to recope. So you have to cope. It's easier to cope with the sudden onset of danger than it is to tell your entire being that just stayed in high alert for 40 days, just go back to normal. Go
yeah,
ahead, just relax. And, you know, so I did find that I had to do a few completely different activities, let's say. I tossed the phone to the side and I did a jigsaw puzzle. Like
yeah,
I put 500 pieces on the table and I spent a couple hours. And honestly, I think it really reset or rested my brain. It gave it a chance to recharge. And then also I actually, it doesn't sound like much of relaxing, but I cleaned the house.
Oh,
And there was something about that activity though that just it forced my whole being to do something different and to think something different,
yeah.
where I wasn't processing information, I wasn't processing news. I was like my that little bit of respite, or if that sounds funny to call cleaning respite, but that little bit of refocusing on different tasks did help me somewhat stabilize like my mind, which was going like 1,000 miles a minute at all times, like trying to figure out like the next thing. So that was somewhat of a break. I mean, look, you can tell me if there's something even better to do, but like I think since that's not my profession, it's not my field, and I'm like, I don't know, and I can imagine if that's what I'm saying, what are millions of people in this region saying that have just been through this war, but also a war before this, and then COVID and shutdown. So I think a lot of people are grappling for answers to these questions, actually, that the average person just wouldn't know.
I think that that is the tragedy of with all the information that you have at your fingertips that people don't know.
Hmm.
And what
Yeah.
you're describing is exactly what needs to happen to regulate, to kind of hit that reset. It's interrupting the mental with the physical. So it
Interesting.
it's exactly what you need to do, because that's how you break up the neurological pathway that's learned a response. So you've learned in 40 days, way very established pattern of response that your body
Hmm.
will remember it. We work in patterns. Our body, our brain, it all works in patterns and learned responses. And if you learn I don't want to say wrong. When I say wrong, I mean because actually in the middle of a war, it's the totally correct response. You're not safe. You
Hmm.
do have to respond. But when that war's over and it's not a danger anymore, your body isn't going to go, oh, okay, fine, I'll just learn a new neurological pathway now. It's going to stay in that pattern it's learned, and it will stay in that responsive. It's dangerous. I have to respond. So the only way you can reset your body is to do something that interrupts that learned pattern. So exactly the things you're saying is exactly what people should be doing. Is something physical, whether that is a jigsaw, whether it is sitting down and doing some yoga, or whether it's walking barefoot outside, or cleaning. These things are all their physical responses, and they interrupt that narrative that we've created, physical response narrative. So those are exactly the things that we would say to do. But I think one of the questions that I did want to ask you is, you know, I know how important. I'll ask you about your passion project, your business in a minute, but I know how important truth is and storytelling for you, and I guess having seen some of the stories that have occurred in the region in the last few years, how do some of those stories must take up permanent residence in your mind, in your heart, in your soul, in your being. How do you carry that around with you? Like, just thinking, just October 7th on its own was such a life-changing occurrence. I mean, even for me from afar, it changed everything for me. And I was not on the front lines. I was not reporting on it. I'm probably have been exposed to far less materials than you have of information of what happened on that day. How do you carry that story around with you and the truth of what happened on that day, and not just have it break you?
Well, let's hope it doesn't someday. But I think for me, and like you said, there were so many stories that were involved and so interconnected. Like so many people that I met that I ended up, I heard their story, and months later, I'd be talking to somebody, and they were telling a story and suddenly I realized, wait a second, they're talking about the same person, but from different perspectives and what happened and the family connections and everything. What has helped me is knowing that whatever I've heard, it's easier for me to cope with that than for the person who's actually dealing with
Yeah.
the actual firsthand trauma. So I definitely, I can definitely say that that's my first go-to is that whatever is heavy on me is heavier on somebody else. Also, I found that for a lot of these people, in like one instance where I was interviewing like several people, it was like October 7th, 2023. I was in the city of Eilat in southern Israel on October 12th, just a couple of days later, and I was interviewing people and they were telling their story for the first time. So maybe they've talked to their friends and family, but this is the first time they sat down in front of a camera and shared with a stranger what was happening. And I realized that my presence was for and my just listening, just the act of listening and just asking curious empathetic questions just about their situation and their well-being was for them some way of relief, of
Mhm.
letting a little bit of tension out of the entire situation. I mean, these were like their hands were shaking, their voices were wavering. This was first, you could tell the first time. Now, I have interviewed people for the last 2.5 years, and you see, like, even the same people, I could see how they improved, how they were a little bit stronger from the first time to the second time, or how they could tell you that same story without shaking, and or how they were processing it different. And I think that something like that is an encouragement um, to me, even to see that, okay, like the worst that happens, you can still get through it. You can still survive. I guess
Yeah.
I am impressed with human resilience,
Yeah.
and just seeing it in front of me is also what helps me get through these dark stories.
Oh, I was just thinking that like the resilience of people is absolutely phenomenal. And I think one of the things that I carry like a passion point is is making that resilience healthy because resilience doesn't necessarily mean that that person is operating in full health. It means that they've found a coping mechanism to push through, as opposed to, you know, having fullness and actually being a fully functioning human. So that's my passion. But it starts with a coping mechanism. You
Mm.
can't come through to health until you found a way to cope. So it's both and. But how do you find did you find that October 7th changed how you interact with news in that region? What did it change for you in terms of also yourself, your identity, how
Mhm.
you cope, but also just how you interact with the news?
Yeah, that is so interesting because I think from October 7th, not because of October 7th necessarily, but there were a lot of things that happened that day. Let's say from a reporter's point of view. First of all, the first news that was coming out was not from traditional news sources. It was actually coming through Arabic language Telegram channels because
Yeah.
Hamas was recording and the Palestinians that were there were recording what they were doing.
Yeah.
And then they were immediately uploading it to Telegram. So then people who could translate would be grabbing it off the channels and translating it. So it was very hard to verify through
Yeah.
traditional sources and in traditional ways. Now, the other thing that this happened to the backdrop of just an a tech. technology revolution, media revolution that's happening in general, which is that you're not waiting for your morning newspaper or your evening news. You're getting news all the time. Now, this has been going on for years, but I would say it accelerated through
Yeah.
war, and in the last couple of years has been something that I have noticed now, because something that is in that's concurrent to that, which is more I would say, like, you see it more sharply when it's a war. Like if it's just day-to-day news, it's not moving as fast. But war is very fast paced. And when that comes out, there's more room for mistakes. I always say, like with breaking news, when, there's like something that an event that happens, there's a shooting or whatever, everybody wants to cover it. Everybody, the competition is I must be the first to get the news, to get the scoop, to get it out there. But there that is usually done at the expense of truth and what actually happened. And there's a
Yeah.
saying I go by, that it is more important to be right than to be first. But what is happening these days is the news is just coming out so fast with so much information that you cannot verify it, or you have to verify every little thing you hear. You've got a Telegram channel and all they're doing is shooting you headlines. They're not giving you any context. They're not giving you any sources where they got it from. So I found that for me personally, as somebody who wants to be accountable, because that's how I was trained, and ethical, and adhere to the truth, I'm having to now verify hundreds of bits of more of information, as opposed to one article that is
Yeah.
well sourced. So it just added so much more to my workload and to the workload of traditional journalists, whereas all of the influencers with their Telegram channels can put up whatever they want, and they don't even have a thought of what is accountability and reporting, or what about, so I found it has added such a challenge to my job, that adds to my stress. And
Yeah.
especially when you're in a 40-day war, where there's every 2 seconds there's new information, and then I feel incumbent to verify it, and then I get buried in the verification of the details and I can't find it out. What do I do with it? And I'm telling you, that has been like, I feel like in all of my career and all the stories that I've covered, the 40-day war, the US-Israel war in Iran, was the most challenging in terms of not just the story itself, but the speed of information that had to be verified, and the misinformation that is
Yeah.
associated with everybody involved. So very, very difficult.
Yeah. I was just gonna say that, you as a person, you hold truth very highly. And I think something we've talked about many times is this influencer phenomenon of, apparently they're all now journalists, and there's no
Yes.
responsibility or accountability or training or understanding about how to report what's going on. And I find that infuriating, because I see it, and that responsibility is it's an amazing thing, because those are the places I find, even if they're saying completely different things, I can at least trust that the intention is to be accountable and responsible with sharing information. And I feel like that is such a lost or taken for granted thing.
Yeah.
So how final question, because we're running out of time, but how do you hold that tension between doing your job well and protecting yourself and providing for your audience?
Well, that's a great question. And I think I'm still learning that, because there is such a tension between doing your job well, but what is relevant for your audience, and how do I manage all of the information and then get it out in a reliable and easy to digest manner.
Mm.
And I believe that this is just basically, we are on the cusp of something with media. Media is totally changing, not just how media is produced, because that's changing, and that's obvious to us. We see it, but it's how media is consumed is also changing. And I have to be honest, I've resisted for many years that people are consuming media on social media. They're consuming news through
Yeah.
headlines and shorts, and I resisted that for years, but I think that's an irreversible course. Now there will always be a format, a long format that will always be an audience that wants long and in depth, whether it's articles or interviews, and that's great. But there is now this short form, and that's how people want it. So it is something that we have to wrestle with as journalists, but more than that, we have to pass on to our children. So now I'll speak to everybody who's not a journalist, that our children need to learn how to consume information,
Yeah.
because they are being taught it in a different way than we were when we grew up. And I think that for me, I am trying to approach even how I do news at that level, because one day I won't be here to do the news,
Yeah.
but my children still need to know how to discern a lot of information and how to understand what is true and what is false. And that's what somehow we have to find. And I believe that we're still in a metamorphosis of that.
Oh, I agree. Critical thinking is a very lost art. Um, it's yeah.
Sadly.
So I think I've got time for one more thing that I just wanted to ask you, and maybe it's too big of a question, and maybe we'll have to do another interview. But I wanted to know what your personal, let's just say tips. What would your tips be for basically your whole life and job operating and revolving around trauma? How do you live in that and carry that and put it down? Sorry, it's a big question.
That was a huge question. I how can I answer that? I think I channel trauma into empathy. And I don't know that that is technically possible, but for me, when I am interviewing somebody who went through a trauma, I it's developing in me an empathy for the situation. I haven't been to Gaza during the war, but I can very humanly empathize with what was happening with the civilians who are living there, who are still to this day living in tents.
Yeah,
And I understand that their trauma must be great. But for me, it's simply now just the empathy. And I think actually, as a journalist, using that empathy, turning it into empathy, actually gives you a better picture as you're writing a story. It enables you to really open your heart and to put life to the information and the news that you're bringing to others. I hope it works, and I hope it's not long-term scars. But I believe that that is what I have done with all of the trauma that I've heard, seen, and experienced in the last couple of years.
that's a really great answer, and I think a great aspiration actually for anyone in any field to approach things and people, events with that in mind. I think that's a really great. And actually, I think if you are turning the focus into empathy, then likely you're not going to end up carrying their load on yourself as much anyway, which is really great. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing.
Mm.
It's been
Thank you.
really, really enlightening and very insightful. And I'm sure I've got a million more questions now that I need to ask you, so we'll have to do another
I'm
one.
open to part two. Hey, I'm open to part two anytime. This has been great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to say a big thank you to Nicole for coming on this podcast and talking to me today. I hope that you really enjoyed what she had to say. I think I loved what she said about empathy, about channeling trauma into empathy. I think that is just the most beautiful approach to how we can cope and deal with the things that we are walking through, how to turn it around to be a gift to somebody else. And yeah, I'm really grateful to have some of these challenges laid at my door. And I also wanted to just jump on and say at this point that I haven't talked a lot about this, but one of the things that I do in my business is that I do run a coaching program for people who carry a lot, whether that is as a journalist or whether that is parenting, or whether it's leading or business or whatever it is, women who carry a lot. And there's no conditions on what a lot may mean to you. But it is a group coaching program. It means you have some one-on-one time, but you also have the opportunity to jump in onto some group calls to connect with other women who are walking through similar things in their life. And it is all about moving from a place of being overwhelmed and maybe a little bit broken and maybe a bit over anxious or overextended, and reconnecting to yourself and restoring some of those things that have maybe become a little bit out of whack or disproportionate or broken, or maybe are not coping as well as you thought. A lot of clients that I deal with use the word crumbling. They feel like they're crumbling underneath everything. And this is a program for those people. It is about restoration. And actually, the whole program is built on the word rest. We have restore, explore, stabilize, and thrive. And it is moving people from A to B. It's goal focused. It's about expanding your growth capacity in a way that is healthy and not in a way that is stretching you, in a way that might break you. We want stretch, but we want it to be a nice, juicy yoga type of stretch, not a kind of you're going to snap in half type of stretch. So that's what I do. A lot of what I do brings in environmental psychology. So we do look at how much your spaces impact your well-being. I do have an element to my business that is space design, where we look at the impact of the spaces that we walk through on a daily basis and how they impact our well-being. I have two ways that end up with the same result, really. It's about nervous system health. It's about trauma-informed understanding and somatics, whether that is through coaching or whether that is coming at it from a design perspective. I use the same onboarding forms and the outcome is the same. We address spaces in the coaching program and we address the coaching in the spaces program. So it's very much an overlap, but it is all about moving you from overwhelm to thrive. And that is my vision, my passion. And I love the opportunities I get on hosting a podcast to bring people in and tell me about how they're coping and how they're thriving and the strategies that they've come up with and the understanding they've developed of themselves, their bodies, their nervous systems, their jobs, their roles, their world, their families, and how these things all work together to create this beautiful, thriving life. So if that is something that you're interested in, I would love for you to jump on the website or drop me a message, Instagram, YouTube. I am on all the things. So do feel free to drop me a note or book a call. I also do free discovery calls for anyone that's interested. I'd love to talk to you to see if this would be a fit for you. So on that note, I'm going to sign off and I will see you in the next episode. Thank you for listening and I'll see you next time.